it's here and it's now. Just move every bone to a cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Toward a Quality of Life here in the month of September. On some days that have turned rapidly quite cold from one particularly steamy day in between and a summer that's been rather rainy and cold, even as New England goes. And as you've always heard me harp, everything goes back to the environment, including this funny weather we are having and have been having and unfortunately will continue to have, and it's kind of scary to think how much colder the winter might get than it did last year, or what kind of weird occurrence may happen with a frequency that never occurred before. So again tonight, our topic and focus is going to be on the environment, and to that end, I have invited a special student who has come to the United States to study, has her bachelor's in human ecology, and now is at MIT as a student in urban planning. And she shares with me and with many of you out there a passion for the environment, a caring and obvious recognition of how dire a strait we are in. It means a lot to her, and I can tell she really feels it, and we will listen and hear what she has to say about really what is the most urgent subject of our times above all else. Her name is Hua Wang, and thank you very much for coming here this evening, Hua.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
You're welcome. And I would like to give a little background about you, that you tell me you come originally from the city of Suzhou in China, which is on the eastern side of China, which is 2 hours away from the city of Shanghai, which is a very big city. Yep. We're in Boston, and it's just a speck of a city in comparison to Shanghai, I'm assuming. There are many more. In fact, you say we have about 500,000 people, and Shanghai has about 10 million people. And against that, you could compare it to New York, which has 8 million people. And as we all know, or have heard, that China and India both have very big populations, and the densities of people in urban centers is quite large in comparison to this country and some others that we may be more used to. And also, just for the record, Shanghai, the city of Suzhou, from which Hua comes and was raised in, is a city of canals. Now the water there is getting dirty, you tell me. It's no longer nice and clean, and people can't swim in it like they used to. But it's a city of canals to control for the water there. And the water comes from a lake nearby, but also from the Yangtze River. Would that be fair to say? If that river overflows, the canals were built so that it could go into the canals and be sort of a method of not having the water spill all over the place. Would that be correct?
All the waterways are connected.
They're all connected. And the Yangtze River runs, we've heard of that famous river, runs from the west to the east and out to the sea in China. And so this city where Hua is from is near the mouth of the Yangtze River. And also she told me that the kinds of activities and entrepreneurial activities, as well as just life occupations that go on in this area, are silk, manufacturing of silk, which comes from silkworms. Silkworms have to make the silk, and she had some pets when she was small, sort of like, not pets, maybe curiosities and love of nature, watching silkworms grow. You keep them in a small box and then a larger box. I guess they get bigger as the silk is more produced. Is that what happens? Or
when they were small, you put them in Matchbox.
Very small.
Yeah. Then when they get bigger.
They do get big.
Yeah. Like probably like a finger big.
Uh-huh.
Then you put them in shoebox.
Uh-huh.
And you watch them make cocoons.
They
and
make
so on.
cocoons, that's
Yeah.
it, I see. And a lot of rice fields in the area of where you were, and all kinds of industry now also growing up in that area because, as we know, China is coming along quite rapidly in economic entrepreneurship, capitalism, even though technically the government is a communist one and the country is a communist one. Is that right?
Yeah.
In what sense is the country communist?
We have one government, we have one party. So in terms of the political structure, it's still, we call it socialism. But in terms of economy, the government started to free up. So for example, 20 years ago, the government planned the economy and nobody can own any private assets. And now the government freed up the economy and we use a market to set price and so on, and people can start to own their own business, and also foreign investments start to come into the country. So in terms of economy, it's, if you will, it's kind of getting similar to capitalism country.
Kind of going wide open, but in terms of military decisions or who's going to make the rules, it's still one party, the Communist Party. It's not an open system, let's challenge how we want to.
No, it's only the Communist Party.
I see. Okay. Well, we won't go into that area today because we are here to talk about our beloved environment. And I might begin by asking you, Hua, why do you care about the environment? I mean, I take it that you really care. Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, I care, and I think everybody should care about it because the environment is where we grow up, and we call it Mother Nature. So how you feel about your mother is, I think, how you should feel about the environment.
When did you start to care about the environment? Did you always notice it? I mean, did you love nature?
I love nature, even though I grew up in a city, but when I was small, there were still plenty of, rice paddies and hills with trees when you go outside the city. So my parents took me on field trips and look at those things. And as a child, you take things for granted and you even don't notice the change. But gradually, as I grew up, I went to elementary school, high school, and you start to read textbooks and so on. You just start to think of more. And then I start to look at the water in my hometown, and it's getting polluted. So it used to be, it's very clean, people can swim in it. But when I was in high school, they were just not safe for swimming anymore. And you can see the color of the water turns into green because there's a lot of eutrophication because people dump sewage and so on into the waterway. And also I started to notice the air. It can be very dusty. So I started to notice that every time I walk back from school to home, I notice that there's a layer of dust on my shoes. So you can tell it.
Ooh, but it's a very arid area. It's dry there, so the dust.
No, it's not.
No?
But imagine China is growing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of construction going on, so you get a lot of dust from there. And also I remember one incident is one day when I biked home, and the sky started to turn yellow, and I wonder why. And then in the evening, I watched the news. They say it's because the sand from northern China, they will actually blow all the way to the south. So I mean, Beijing, where near the sandstorm is about like 3 hours by plane to Suzhou, but it's a huge distance, and you start to see like the dry area in the north. They have lots of desert, and then all these sandstorm that they start to influence the people in the south, and also actually they also blow to South Korea, so it goes very far. And all these things happen around like myself, and also looking at watching news and reading books, I started to notice that our environment is under distress, and especially in China in the past 20 years, as the economy is growing, and it's getting worse.
This dust, is it normal for the north of China to have dust blowing, or is that something that's from development as well, or is that an arid area that sends sand around?
I would say it's not, it's something recent in terms of the scale of the problem, because when I was small, I didn't remember that there are such incidents that you have sand all the way from north to Suzhou. So I think it's only recently, because of the development, because of the desertification of the northern China, that this problem gets bigger. And
In other words, when they're removing the trees and the rice paddies and the wetlands, it's becoming more dry. As it's becoming more dry, the wind takes up the sand and more sand is appearing.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
more sand and,
Yeah, one thing is that people are using more wood because of they use that for fuel, they use that for construction, and also people are using a lot of water for industry and irrigation. So that all adds up, and that increased the drought in northern China. Actually, there's a river called Yellow River in northern China. It almost every year it flow halfway, and then it just get dry and it just stopped. So you have a river used to flow all the way from the west to the east into the ocean, but nowadays, because so many industries and agriculture are using the water, so it probably stopped halfway in the summer, and it just get really dry.
So it'd be fair to say that, and this soot that you're talking about in your hometown that got on your shoes, when you say it's due to construction, do you mean like when you dig up the earth and it makes sand and that's why it's on your shoe, or that the air gets full of dirt, like from smog or I forgot what it's called, but we have it in Boston here. When in a certain areas in Boston, when I used to park my car, overnight there would be a silt on the windows, just from the air. It would just, particles, particulates in the air would just. Is that what it's from, or is it from that there's so much digging going on when you walk and it gets on your shoes? Is it in the air? Is it in the ground?
Probably it's both.
Both.
I remember, the way I go to school, it's all roads, it's all paved. So I don't imagine that I actually walk in the dirt all the time, so I get all these dust. I think part of it is from construction and
from taking up the trees and disturbing the sand and also the air, and just more filthiness around. Yeah. Okay. Now, when you're in the United States, so that's a very brief introduction to China, and we hear a lot about China having serious environmental problems. We hear a lot about that. I can't even begin to recount them, but I see a lot of things go by in the news where there's extraordinary floods like they've never had them, or other tornadoes, or wind sandstorms, and many, many things you read across a very, very big country with very, very different kinds of climates and terrains depending on where it is. So we're not even talking about China. It's not even an introduction. Be that as it may, now that you're in the United States and you've seen the United States, what do you think about the United States in terms of the environment?
In terms of environment, I can talk from my experience. I did my undergrad at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. by the Katy National Park. So my introduction to the U.S. is very nice. You have these great national parks where the environment is protected and people can still access and get education, which I think is really great. And then I moved to Boston area, so I got some experience of living in the city, and I started to see also problems of urbanization, things like urban sprawl. You have these huge cities and going from miles and miles, and also visiting these industrial towns like Worcester, like Lowell, and all these places. You have lots of polluted land that left by previous industries, and these are really depressed areas, and people are still thinking about what to do with them. So I really see two sides of U.S. On one hand, certain areas are well protected, but
Well, the national parks are not well protected at the moment. They're going to open more, they're trying to open more area for private concessions. They want snowmobiles to be able to be in the parks, which make a lot of noise and make a lot of destruction along the way. The funding for keeping them like they should be is not up to snuff. So there's even though they're so gorgeous and beautiful, that's the thing with this country. There's so much that's so great because it's so great to start with. It's not totally destroyed yet. We're doing things that aren't helpful to it, but you can still see very great beauty. But nevertheless, we're not taking care by any means the way that we should. What about urban sprawl? What's the big deal about urban sprawl?
I see urban sprawl as a kind of conflict between the humans and the wilderness. When we sprawl, we take up land, we take up agricultural land, we take up forests, and a lot of times forests, they are really important habitats for wildlife. So I do see that part. And when humans are increasing their material needs, they are taking more and more shares from the wildlife.
Do you think there should be less humans? Should people control their populations?
I think it's less about a population issue. I think it's about a way of life. Because, for example, U.S. doesn't have a lot of population, but U.S. consumes more energy than any other country.
By far.
Yeah, so it is about a style of life. I think we can have even more people, but if people live frugally, they can maybe use green technology, green fields, and those. I think people can actually have less impact on the environment.
Well, how would people live if you have the same population and they don't sprawl out into urban areas? What would you recommend? If they're not moving out and grabbing a piece of land for themselves and the population remains the same or even gets larger, how could they live in physical terms?
In physical terms, people can, for example, people don't have to have single-family house. People can have, smaller house. People can live in apartments, actually, which that's what a lot of Chinese do. And people can, instead of using cars, you can rely on public transportation. Or because we live closer, we live denser, we are closer to workplace, we can actually use bike, we can walk. I think you don't have to, sprawl out. We can definitely live closer and depend on, walking and bike.
So it's good for people to live congested together, in close proximity to each other? Is that good? To live in are you talking about high rises?
not necessarily high rise. I would imagine something like maybe 3 or 4 floors of those buildings.
And not a lot of land around them, around each one?
I mean, of course, it would be nice to have some garden, some green. I think that's necessary to have a good environment to live in. But I don't see the necessity for every house to have a huge lawn. I mean, why not just, share a common green and put all the green together, and instead of having, every single family house has a huge lawn and you waste a lot of water, and also you put pesticide and so on. So.
You're saying that there should be a common garden area, common green area for more than one unit or more than one family?
What I mean is that instead of having all these single family house and every family has a huge lawn, we can live closer and we can pull these green together and have a common area. I think in that way you probably require less construction area and also, less area from the nature, from the wilderness, and still people can share the green, the common green.
In other words, you don't want to take as much land away from the open wilderness. You want to preserve as much wilderness as possible?
Yeah, I mean, if people can do that, and I think people have the ability to do that, and I think by doing that, people can still enjoy the same level of living standard and happiness. So why not?
But what about this idea of people saying, this land is mine, don't put your foot on it, don't step on my territory, this is my garden, I made it, this urge in people to define their individuality?
I guess the solution can be, we put some land together for a public garden, and also we put a small area for yourself. You can, maybe put like, pot, and you put flowers and so on in your room, and you maybe keep a small area for maybe planting something you really like. So I think we can balance this.
Well, in London, they have common garden areas in some sections. Along the street, there'll be one area that's a garden for everybody. Yeah, so that's an older idea. I don't know.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, people should learn how to share things, and I think community garden or common garden is a good place to learn that, and also it's a good place for people to socialize and so on.
Sharing and socialism, as you defined your government, for example, or your country, are not in vogue right now in this country. They're not ideas that are in vogue. Personal responsibility, personal endeavor, doing everything on one's own is very often repeated on the media. Is a strong push for that right now, and socialism sort of has a dirty connotation to it, a bad connotation currently in this country.
I think people can, for the same notion, I can also say that people should take responsibility. So they should take responsibility to change their own lifestyle. And I think that's the most effective way people can contribute to a better environment is to start from yourself. Start to maybe drive less and bike more, or try to buy hibernate car instead of SUV and so on. So I would
hybrid car.
Yeah, hybrid. So I would take that of personal freedom into another way, as taking personal responsibilities.
What kind of things would you like to see in the ideal urban plan, or besides a common garden area? What else? How else would you be conserving resources and helping people to socialize and sharing? What else would be the case?
I would say area for learning, to get informed, so we can have a center. Children can learn about wellness, and from the small age, they can know that we should care about our environment. So I I would say a learning center, or a center for people to come together and think about how we can improve our environment and so on. I think that would be great.
So we want to go into smaller cars or no cars, preferably to bike or walk, to have everything close by in urban areas so that it's feasible to not have to drive all over the place, and to have public transportation across the country to take you from one place to another, saving an awful lot of fuel. And of course, it would have to be designed, it could be designed with great ergonomics and pleasure for the human being in mind. It doesn't have to be what it is now, often a very unpleasant experience to get on a train or a plane, for that matter, to be, yeah. And what about planes? What about flying all around?
I guess flying is becoming part of today's life. You know, even I have to fly to the U.S. I think it's necessary, but I think people can work on how to make fuel efficient plane, and also I guess with the better communication, like satellite phones and internet, I think people can reduce the amount of time they spend on travel, so people can work at home, and so in this way, you know, we can travel less. It's another way of saving fields and contribute to the environment. Yeah.
Travel less for business and things of urgency, so to speak, but maybe travel more leisurely over land and by sea, the way we might have, exploring the world and learning about people in non-consuming ways, in non-piggy ways of just, you know, using very little and seeing places at our leisure. If we could ever have a life like that, that would be a wonderful thing. Instead of jetting and taking a photo of the Eiffel Tower and then jetting off to something else.
Yeah, people can go hiking. That's a great way to get close to nature. It's better than you sitting in the plane and not seeing anything.
Yes. So it's important to be close to nature?
Yeah, I think, you know, in order to love something, you have to be close to it. You have to know about it. You have to kind of form this close relationship. Then we can love the nature.
Why do we need the environment?
Well, I guess that's back to like the starting point is that we live in this environment. We get resources from the environment, and you know, we get leisure from the environment, and we hope this relationship can be harmonious, and we hope that this relationship can be sustainable, because we can't imagine that you know, living in an environment where there's no trees and no animals, and there's hurricane every year, there's drought every year, and we don't want our future generations live in such a disastrous environment. So really that's because we depend on the environment. So we hope that we can, you know, respect the environment and live harmoniously with the environment.
And I think you said something too, that the environment will get back at you, and it's certainly true that nature is bigger than any of us could ever imagine. Nature will always have the last say. Even our own human nature is bigger than our ego. In other words, the nature that we're made of, we poorly understand. We can never understand it. We are it, and it's bigger than us.
I think, you know, having a little bit humbleness, humility, that helps. I mean, when you deal with people, you know, always have some humility, and it's the same for our environment, because you cannot know everything, you cannot control everything, and so, you know, having some respect, it always helps.
Where do animals fit into this whole picture, animals and the wilderness?
I guess there can two ways of looking at it. One thing, animal is part of the environment. It's, you know, if you think about the ecosystem, you think about the food chain, and So if you have, one glitch in the food chain, then that will affect the whole ecosystem, and eventually it will also affect the human. And the second way of looking at it is it's really a joy, to share to live, happily with animals and not making friends with them, but if you go whale watch or you go bird watch, and all these are great pleasure to human beings. So that's
Do you think it's to all human beings?
yeah. Ultimately, human beings are all animals. So I think it's kind of nature. Maybe people realize it or not.
Our favorite pastime is football. It is. But, the joy of being with animals. What about, well, I'm thinking now too, though. I heard, this makes me very sad, I love animals. I love animals more than anything. And all animals, I love them to live, and even if I don't see them, if I never see them, I want to know that the panda bear is eating the bamboo leaves and having a fine time, and nobody's taking him to a zoo. And nobody's bothering him where he lives. I want to know that. Or that the grizzly bear is all right. I want to know that. And I'm thinking with these recent hurricanes, this last one, I heard a reporter telling that when people go back into very broken areas, very damaged areas, with where the water came 5 feet high, when they go into their homes, there are snakes and other wildlife hiding in there for no place from the hurricane. And this really makes me feel terrible, And I think of how, to many of us, they're going to be, and they are. Some of them are poisonous snakes, and others are wild animals that will be a danger because they're scared and they're trapped and they're hungry and they're wild. And I'm just wondering what people will do to these animals. They'll get killed. They'll kill them. It's another sad way that the animal loses out, from disasters that befall us that really all go back to ways that we're ruining the environment.
I'm not sure if this more frequency of hurricane is related to global warming and all these recent environmental change, but if it is, there's close relation, then I do think people should worry, and people should do something about it. And in terms of animals, I think the best way to love animals is actually really leave them alone.
Leave them alone.
Don't bother them.
Not even watch the whales. That's, send the boats out all the time. We need it to educate people. But on the other hand, they can't even live because these tour boats are coming around there all the time.
Yeah. Just imagine, put yourself in the position of animals. I don't think they want to be bothered. So, when, you're as a human, just don't bother them. I think that's the best way of loving and taking care of animals.
Yeah, and some wonderful things can happen even with wild animals when you leave them alone. In terms of human bonding, when you're not encroaching on them. There have been some amazing stories of human bonding with wild animals that can occur just from natural respect. Whether the hurricanes are part of global warming, well, that, regardless of that issue per se, there is one thing that is true. Generally, the winds, when they do come of any sort, are stronger. We're reaching miles per hour that with greater frequency than we ever did before. It's clustering now. It's skewed on a statistical map. The amount of rain and the deluge that can fall, hurricane or otherwise, just drop on you like someone opened up water to just fall instead of rain. The degree to which there can be drought, etc. Any of these, the temperature variation in a 24 or 48-hour period, the range, all these things are going way beyond historical averages, recent historical averages. So that That second hurricane, was it Charlie, was as big as the state of Texas. It was 1,000 miles wide. And this third hurricane was unusually big as well. So we're constantly breaking the limits, going beyond the limits, and we're always having, and you won't hear meteorologists say, whoa, something is happening here. You know, you don't hear that, you know. And we have situations like Vegas taking up all the water, or you know, all those conditions out west where they want to dam up the water to use it, and then also the salmon won't be able to run because they're, you know, the rivers will dry up. Yeah. So we've got problems aplenty. You said now people may not want to live in an environment without trees and nature. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Road Warrior, but in it, if those of you who have, I bet most of you have, it's a very desolate environment. Trees are gone. It's all dusty. It's all dirt. It's all, you know, and all the leftovers of industry, rusting machines and this kind of thing. But I've lived in Miami, for example, and though there are such beautiful things in Miami, people do live in concrete in Miami. They live with air conditioning and inside their units, and they don't, you know, very often their lives don't involve nature at all. It just involves air-conditioned car, air-conditioned home, air-conditioned office, air-conditioned restaurant. And there's not, you won't see walking going on generally in Miami, for example. So people do find not a problem to be in concrete environments. You know?
Yeah, but I mean, people, no matter what, I think people take vacations and they, you know, they take time to get out of office buildings. That really shows that in people's nature, they want to be close to nature.
I'm getting a signal to stop. I guess we are going to have to stop here. Is there anything you would like to say to people to take away with them in thinking about the environment, you know, in urban planning and so on?
I have 2 points. One is I really believe that people should start things, you know, from small, from themselves, you know, start from today to change their lifestyles to more environmental friendly. And second thing is I think people should look what's happening in the world, and also looking at what's happening in the developing countries. And there's a lot of things going on, the economic growth and also environmental degradation. So I think, you know, people should notice that, and maybe they can do something about it. Maybe bringing, you know, advanced technologies in the developed world. We have all these hybrid cars and all these things. I think people should start to think about not only marketing those in the U.S. but also in the developing countries. So when they develop, they don't have to repeat the mistakes that happened in the U.S. and in Europe. So maybe they can, you know, have a balanced environment and also economic growth.
Mm-hmm. Personally, in closing, I would say that I believe we need to convene together. We need to push an agenda that we would all together be talking about this across all industries, across all facets of life, to come up with some regulatory policies. Regulation is a dirty word in this country, but a constant push towards raising consciousness, and that we're all in this together, and how can we mutually change, not just each person doing a little bit. Of course, that's very useful, but it's very unbalanced, and it makes some of us say, well, we can't compete with those who are not environmentally conscious. You know, we have to use all the things to keep up with competition. So perhaps we could constantly be promoting coming together of people to constantly harp on this theme. What are we going to do about the environment? And that we want candidates. We want candidates in politics that put the environment first and foremost. But unfortunately in this country, you have to get a lot of money to be a candidate, and so you'd have to be asking the industries who would fear that they would suffer. So it's the chicken and the egg. But nevertheless, we have to be raising consciousness about environment and all the roadkill and all the animals and all the trees that we need, all the gardens, all the fresh food, non-pesticided food, all the small farmers back in business, and urban planning, the smaller units, shared living spaces, beautiful parks for everybody, national transportation, good, beautiful, nice transportation, and clean ways of living as regards our water and air. We're pressed for time here, so I'm going to say good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, and I'd like to thank you once again, Hua Wang from MIT, for coming here and giving us some of your feeling and information about urban planning and problems of the environment.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this show. And just one more point, I made a flash movie about ecological planning. So if you're curious about what ecological planning, you can follow the website and do that ecological planning tutorial.
Great point. We will have that website for you at the end of this show. So look for it. It's a very entertaining website. It's got some really cute animation. It's very captivating. And so children will love it, and you'll love it too at any age. So we'll have that URL for you, and please check it out. Thank you, good evening, and see you again soon.
It's fun and it's warm.